Hello and welcome to today's Trainer Education webinar, Courageous Leadership for Women, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Bill Treasurer. Today's webinar will last approximately an hour. Before we begin, do note that there is a question or chat box. It's probably located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. There you can send us any questions you have during the webinar, and we'll answer them as they come in. We'll hold them potentially for the Q&A at the end with Bill, or we'll email you at the end if we don't have time to get to all of our questions. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and I will moderate today's webinar. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Today's presenter is Bill Treasurer. Bill is a leadership expert and the originator of the new organizational practice of courage building. He is also the author of several books, including Right Risk and the international bestseller Courage Goes to Work. Bill's latest publication is Courageous Leadership, a program for using courage to transform the workplace. It is a comprehensive, off-the-shelf training program that can be used to build courage in any organization. Bill is the founder and Chief Encouragement Officer at Giant Leap Consulting, a courage-building company that helps people and organizations live more courageously. Bill has conducted more than 500 corporate workshops designed to strengthen people's leadership skills and improve team performance. His clients include Accenture, PNC Bank, NASA, UNICEF, Spanx, CNN, and the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. And a fun fact here about Bill: he is a former member of the U.S. high diving team where he dived from 100 feet. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Bill.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. I very much enjoy working with Sarah Montgomery from HRDQ and all the good folks there that have worked so hard to get this webinar up and running. And I'm very much looking forward to spending time with all of you. We've had close to 1,000 registrants for today's webinar. And I think that means that the topic of courage, and in this case as it relates to women, is very popular. So I'm very much looking forward to spending time with all of you. And we have people coming into today's webinar from quite literally all over the world. So I'm just as excited as anybody else to be here, believe me, and I'm honored to be here. My name is Bill Treasurer. I'm the author of a new program called Courageous Leadership, a program for using courage to transform the workplace. And HRDQ will be making this available to you later on, this program itself, and it's what today's session is based on. The agenda is basically this. I'm going to share with you some context and background about what I mean by courage as it relates to the workplace, and then we'll talk about the unique challenges that women have when it comes to courage. I'll share with you some profiles of people that I believe to be courageous in the workplace. I'll share with you some what I hope are unique and original ideas relative to the idea of being courageous. And then along the way and at the end of the session, I'll be sharing with you some tips about how you can personally be more courageous, as well as what you can do to inspire more courageous behavior among those that you may lead. So with that as a little bit of background, let's go into some context and some background. I'm trying to promote a new organizational development practice that I call courage building. Now, I know that pretty much everybody on today's webinar has heard of the term team building before. I believe that courage building is just as important, if not more important, than team building. In fact, if you go to couragebuilding.com, it's my URL, so you'll find my company there. That's how strongly I believe in it. We're going to go now to the 3 premises of courage building. And the first premise is this, that courage is a skill. It is teachable. It is learnable. And you've been learning to be courageous all your life. You might remember when you were a little kid that you were on your bicycle, probably about 6 years old, and maybe your mom or your dad was standing behind your bicycle, and they took off those training wheels, and they pushed you forward, and you took a couple of wobbly pedals, and you probably fell down, maybe scraped your knee a little bit. And what'd your parent make you do? They made you get back up on that bike and do it again. When you learned how to ride a bicycle, it was a lesson in courage. Or maybe you and a bunch of giggly girls were in the backyard with the Girl Scouts, and you pitched a tent, you had a campfire going, your parents were there, and you started to tell spooky stories to one another. And then your parents went inside, and you had to weather the night together after having told spooky stories. That was a lesson in courage. The interesting thing is that our need to be courageous doesn't stop when we're kids. It expands and grows and takes different shape over time. So courage is a skill, it's teachable, it's learnable, and it is necessary. Secondly, people perform better for longer periods of time with higher engagement and morale when they're operating out of confidence, courage, and conviction than when they're operating out of fear and anxiety. Sadly, however, most organizations still use fear and anxiety as the primary means of getting things done, and unfortunately it has just the opposite impact of what those kind of leaders are asking for. Thirdly, the third premise of courage building is that the entire organization benefits when everyone is showing up to work each day with just a little bit more courage. If you take the individual act of courage and you aggregate it into the organizational, it has the potential to have a culturally transformative effect on the entire organization. So what does it look like when we have courage at work? I'm going to share with you just a few examples, but I'll ask you to think about what are some of the most courageous things you've seen in the workplace. I'm just going to share with you 5 examples, but you'd all be able to come up with many, many others, I'm sure. How about leaving a comfortable job to take a new position that eclipses your current skills? Many of you on the webinar have probably done that. How about giving a presentation to your boss's boss? You know, the book of lists says that the top phobias, the fear of death is about 5th on the list, and public speaking is 1st on the list. People would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. So public speaking is a big requirement in most organizations. It requires a tremendous amount of courage. How about delegating a risky task to an untested and new employee? It takes giving up control in order to do that, and for some people that's very difficult to do. How about informing a key client or customer about a mistake that you or your company made and sort of fessing up about it and putting yourself at risk in doing so? That takes courage. And then what about enforcing new performance standards on tenured employees? These are just a handful. Others might include dealing with an intimidating boss or giving tough feedback to a sensitive employee, or even asking for a raise. When I was in Tokyo last year, one of the participants raised their hand and said, you know, Bill, the most courage that I've ever had to demonstrate at work was when I had to lead people out of this building during the earthquake. So who knows how courage will manifest itself for you, but clearly it's needed in the workplace. In any situation like this, we exist on a continuum that ranges from comfort to discomfort. Now, it really ranges from safety to opportunity, that most people are either seeking safety or pursuing opportunity in any given situation. We're willing to go out on the safety continuum to some degree, and we define that area as our comfort zone. Well, if you're not in your comfort zone, by definition, where are you? You're in your discomfort zone. And here's the important thing to recognize, and it's a key lesson of today's webinar, is that human beings and organizations don't grow in an area of comfort. We grow, learn, and progress as individuals and as organizations in a zone of discomfort. Not so far out into discomfort that you're petrified with fear or that you choke in your performance, but enough that you are into this third place that we call your courage zone, where you get the psychological and physiological cues that tell you that your body has moved into a different condition, that you're full of fear, but you're managing that fear and working through it. You've moved into discomfort in order to grow. But here's the thing. For anyone on this phone, on this webinar today, that learning and growth happens in this zone of discomfort. So you have 2 jobs if your job is a leader. First, it's to make sure that you're doing things that are outside of your own comfort zone, that you're stretching, that you're pursuing new goals. And if you're in a leadership position, the second thing you need to do is to inspire the people around you to be more courageous by ushering them, shepherding them into their zone of discomfort. So if you think about it, your job as a leader is to partly make people uncomfortable, not comfortable. Now, you have to do it in an absorbable way. You have to do it for the benefit of that person. You have to do it in slow increments. But if you let people stay in comfort, they won't grow, and it's not good for them, and it's not good for the organization. Women have unique context that goes even above and beyond this. First, let's recognize this. The number of women from the Forbes 100 Most Powerful Women's list, who are also on the Forbes 100 Most Powerful People list, is only 5. That means that Forbes did a list of the 100 most powerful people, and only 5 of them were also on the most powerful women list, which is shameful that they have to grapple that hard to find powerful women. The percent of women who are also Fortune 500 CEOs, out of 500 women, only 3%, or out of 500 CEOs on the Fortune 500, only 3% are women. The interesting thing is, if you look at this next slide, the public comfort with women as leaders is said to be high. People identify it and say, no, I'm comfortable with women in leadership roles. 89% of people say that they're comfortable with women in leadership roles. And yet, according to a benchmarking study done by the White House, that women in top leadership positions only make up 18%. So we're comfortable with women in leadership roles. The challenge is that there aren't enough of them in leadership roles. Now, they're starting to become more so, thankfully. But here's the sad thing. The disparity between men and women in terms of pay remains. For every dollar that a man makes, a woman makes 78 cents. Now, yesterday I actually saw an article that had updated this and said it was making 77 cents, that women are making 77 cents. So it may have actually gone down, which is either way that you look at it. Women have to contend with additional things in the workplace that are unique to them that men don't contend with. I'll share with you some others. Here's some continuums that I think the hardest thing, well, let me pose it like this, that I'm just a dunderheaded guy. I'm just a guy who was asked to speak at a women's conference last year. And so I started becoming interested in the issue about women in the workplace. And I'm really thankful for the opportunity that I had to do so, because it was enlightening for me. I'm just your average guy in the workplace who walks around oblivious to women's issues. But now that I've gotten closer to it, I understand your plight in terms of, I understand that the unique challenges that you face that are different than men. And you're held to a standard that is different than men. And you're held to a standard that is very difficult to succeed within, because it's a range that ranges between bad to bad. For example, so you'll see here the slide that says finding balance. I want to share with you the first continuum. I think that you're judged according to whether you're too meek. In other words, you're kind of a wallflower. You're too meek, or you're too aggressive. You're too aggressive. And we even come up with bad names for that. Common names that we say for women who are too aggressive. So how can you win if you're held to a continuum that you're either too this or you're too that? Or you're considered overly sensitive. Well, she's really defensive. She gets really sensitive to feedback. So you've got to be really careful about how you, or she's a cold fish. Oh, you know, she can't build any relationships at all. She's like a cinder block. She just has no feelings and no emotion. Or the next continuum, she's too focused on the home. Well, she's very focused on her family life, so she's probably not going to succeed very far in her career. She's going to plateau because she's all about the family. Or, oh, that poor thing, she's all about work and she'll probably never have a family. It's really hard to exist when you are having to contend with two, you damned if you do and damned if you don't continuums. She's too prone to gossip. Oh, she's really gossipy. She's all about work relations. But boy, if we could just get her to do some work around here. Or, you know, she's not very good about building workplace relations. again, caught between this rock and a hard place. And then finally, sadly, oh, she's too sexy. Look at how sexy she dresses. She dresses so provocatively. She's trying to get ahead by her fashion statements. Or she's so matronly. Look at how she dresses like a librarian. She's so old-fashioned. I want to share with you this idea that you're caught between two continuums that, you know, men don't contend with this. We don't have the same challenges that you do in terms of having to deal with the judgment of others, and judgment, frankly, mostly of men, but even of women, relative to these kind of continuums. I remember a couple of years ago that, you know, Hillary Clinton, she's a real lightning rod for people, whether you like her or you don't like her. And there was big complaints about, well, look, she always wears those desexualized pantsuits. She's so frumpy. She's such a fuddy-duddy. And then, 2007 or 8, she goes on TV on the Senate floor with a low-cut blouse, and that became the headline in the paper the next day. When she was on the campaign trail, they used to talk about her being, oh, she's so stoic. She can't relate to people. There's something unrelatable about her. And then on the campaign trail, one day she's eating in a restaurant with somebody asked her what's it like to have to contend with all of the high pressures of this campaign trail, and she welled up in her eyes, and that became the story the next day. Oh, look at how emotional she is. She can't take it. It was like a perfect example of she can't be judged as good or bad. She has to be judged on a continuum ranging from bad to bad, depending on who's judging her. And I don't say that as a political statement. I say it as a female statement, as a woman having to contend with a set of judgments that men do not. I want to open it up right now. I'm going to ask Sarah to help out by doing a few poll questions. And Sarah, if we can go to the first poll question, that would be cool. And the first poll question, let's see, is, are you currently facing a personal or professional challenge that requires a lot of courage to face or will require a lot of courage to face? So are you currently facing a personal or professional challenge that will require a lot of courage to face? So the answer is A or B, yes or no. And we'll give you a moment to go ahead and put your answers down. And then Sarah, since I'm not able to see this, if you can give me a sense of what the percentages are, that would be great.
Absolutely. We still have a couple more respondents coming in. All right. It looks like we have most everyone. So everyone should be able to see the responses now. They're very interesting, Bill. We have 87% says yes and 13% says no.
Wow, that is really interesting because it really suggests that the webinar is relevant to a lot of folks on the webinar because they're actually facing personal challenges that are going to require a good dose of courage. And for those of you that think the answer is no, I totally respect that. It may be that by the end of the webinar, something surfaces for you that causes you to think differently. Let's go ahead and we'll go to the next question. I want you to think about those instances when you have to muster up your courage at work. And using the list below, select the source that you are most likely to draw upon. Is it A, having a trusted mentor or a role model? Is it B, being thoroughly rehearsed or thoroughly researched and prepared? Is it C, being confidently dressed? Is it D, having peer support? Or is it E, relying on your own faith? So we'll give a moment for this, and then Sarah will check in and tell us what the answer shaped out to be.
Okay. Looks like we have everyone here. We have 19% having a trusted mentor, 59% being thoroughly researched, 2% being confidently dressed, 6% having peer support, and 14% relying on my faith.
Okay, terrific. Well, a couple of things. First of all, it smashes the stereotype about sort of fashion as it relates to empowering women with courage necessarily. And then it is the most common answer here on today's webinar, but very often it's the case that when you are thoroughly researched, prepared, you lower the risk. And risk-taking is courage in action. It's the application of courage is when you're taking a risk. So I think that follows suit. I wouldn't say I was surprised, but it very often comes up that people do rely on their faith to give them a sense of courage, to put courage inside of them. Most religious traditions are about driving out fear, which is fundamentally about putting courage inside of you. And then having a trusted mentor, I even offer that as a tip. That is a great way to find your courage, is to find people that you admire for their courageous behavior. Terrific. Let's go ahead and we'll go to the third polling question. And I'll ask you, where are you more likely to take risk? At work or at home? So where are you more likely to take risks? At work or at home? A moment for that. And we'll see how this shapes up for you.
Okay. We have 53% at work and 47% at home.
47% at home. Interesting. What I find is that people are more willing to take risks at work when they're in positions of more control at work. So very often it's a function of can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was able to get on my landline while we were talking.
Oh, nice.
It's very often a function of where you are in control. And so if you feel that you are more in control of, to use a Seinfeld word, of your own domain at work, you're more likely to take risks there. You tend to be more confident in that place. Now, I will say this, that my experience has been when I have spoken to a large number of middle managers, and frankly female middle managers, that the tendency is for more of them to be more comfortable taking risks at home. But when I speak to business owners, the majority in the room of which are men, say 75% men, it switches. Most of them are willing to take risk at work, something to the almost 80% of them. And so it often comes down to the level that you are in the organization, which suggests to me that the people on the phone here are probably more in leadership roles. The more likely you are a leader at work, the more likely you are to be confident, in fact, expected to do courageous things in the workplace. Let's go ahead and move to the next one, the next polling question. In general, do you believe that it's acceptable for women to take risks in the workplace? Is it as acceptable for women to take risks in the workplace as it is for men? And we'll see what your answer selects to be.
A few more seconds here and we'll have everyone on the line.
So do you believe it's as acceptable for women as it is for men? And how did we shake out?
So we have 58% said yes and 42% said no.
Okay, interesting. What we don't know is how many of you today on the webinar are women and how many of you are men. Now, we can surmise that the vast majority of you are women. That said, we know that there are plenty of men that are on today's as well. I think if we did this exclusively by gender, we might find different answers. I'm pleased, though, to find that you believe that it is as acceptable for women to take risks in the workplace as it is for men. I think it's expected when you're in a leadership role. That said, because of the stereotypes we talked about before and the judgments that women are held under that are different than men are, I also understand the 42% of you that feel that it isn't. And I'd say classically, perhaps stereotypically, we sort of expect men to charge the hill, to be full of ambition at work, to be career-oriented. So we hold some of these stereotypes. But I think that over time, some of these stereotypes are becoming less magnified in their importance.
So let's then move to the next polling question, and that is select the workplace concept that you think requires the most courage. And the answers ranging from leading others, creativity/innovation, dealing with change, working with picky clients, and or managing conflict. And let's see what we come up with here. So the workplace, and these are just a handful. If I offered an other category, you might add some. It's certainly not all inclusive, but I am very interested to find out, at least relative to these concepts, which ones you think requires the most amount of courage. And we'll see how we land on this.
Okay, looks like we have just about everyone. We have 19% leading others, 11% creativity and innovation, 20% dealing with change, 4% working with picky clients, and 46% managing conflict.
A couple of interesting things. One is just how relevant courage is to so many workplace concepts. Pretty much all of these have some statistic around it, although less so with the picky clients. Managing conflict, it makes sense because it involves an interpersonal confrontation. It often involves assertiveness. It involves interpersonal funkiness after the conflict. So a lot of times, for those very reasons, we avoid it. You could almost ask the question as, which of these do we tend to avoid the most? And it may be the one that requires the most courage, and that would be managing conflict. So that's just to give you some context and background and to sort of personalize today to make it relevant to you. And in particular, the first question that we asked when we had something over the 80% mark of you are contending with something that requires a heavy dose of courage. So with that in mind, I want to share with you some profiles in courage. And to get us into this, I'd like to open it up by just asking a question. I'm going to ask that you just drop in some answers into the question field on your webinar tool. And the question is this. The slide is, think of a leader you most admire at work. So think of a leader you most admire at work. What are some of the things that that leader does that builds people's courage? Exactly. So think of a leader you most admire at work. What are some of the things that that leader does that builds people's courage? Now, I would prefer that you don't think of somebody on the world stage. I'd like you to think about a leader that you've worked for, or maybe still work for, that you look up to, that you admire, and that you come away with a sense of more courage. What are some things that leaders like that do that builds people's courage? And feel free to go ahead and put your answer in the question box. And we'll see what you come up with.
We have a number already, Bill, coming in, and due to some limitations with technology, not everyone can see those, so I'll call out a few of them. We've got positive reinforcement, communication, strong vision, ask for input, and listen. Listen's coming up here a number of times. Oh, I have one here interesting. Shows courage herself, delegating and empowering, motivates, inspires, recognizing that employee as a person, motivation. Oh, honest has come up here a few times. Trust has come up a number of times. Encouraging innovation as well.
Excellent. And when you think of the list that was just come up with, you could almost ask, what makes an exemplary leader? And these are the kinds of things. I mean, these are the leadership ideals that if we aspire to them and hopefully start to acquire some of these things, we become a better, more confident, more courageous leader. I often ask this a different way because I often include a fear segment in my courage workshops about think of a leader you least admire and think of the things that they do that undermine people's ability to be courageous. And the reason that I ask both of those questions in the workshop is to ask ourselves, which of these leaders are we being and how would we know? Because most of the time when we're being a negative leader, people don't tell us because they're afraid to and afraid of reprisal or that it won't make a difference. And if it's human nature to not tell a leader when they're being abhorrent, then how are we going to know what kind of leader we're being? Because people aren't going to tell us either. The good news is you just came up with a lot of, first of all, it sounds like a lot of people deposited answers, which suggests that a lot of you have worked for leaders that you admire, which is terrific. My hope is that you are also being a leader that is admirable for other people that might be looking up to you. But positive reinforcement, strong communication, we absolutely want a leader who listens to us, who actually values our ideas, who solicits our input, who considers our input, and often acts on our input. So listening is very essential. Honesty came up a couple of times. We want, in fact, it's the #1 attribute that we look for in a leader, regardless of a female or a male, or courageous or not courageous. The #1 attribute that we look for in leaders is honesty. And the dividend of honesty, which also came up, is trust. That when you have a leader who's honest with us and is a straight talker, a good communicator who lets us know why we're doing what we're doing, that it builds a sense of trust between us and them, and that is the currency that holds leaders and followers together. So I want to share with you now that you came up with a great list of admirable attributes. I want to share with you just three different leaders who I believe exemplify some of the things that you just talked about. So the first one I want to share with you on the next slide is Ginny Rometty. Now you might remember in the very beginning of today's webinar, I suggested to you that there are only 3% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. There's about 15 of them. And the most recent addition to the ranks is Ginny Rometty. Virginia Rometty is with IBM. She spent about 30 years at IBM. There's a couple of things that make her courageous. The first is that she has had a long track record and history at IBM of taking jobs that eclipsed her current skills. She would purposely take on jobs that were challenging and out of her current skill set in order to grow new skills. And over time, that became preparation and grooming, and she started moving and ascending in her career, and it became so valuable that now she is the CEO of the company because of her depth of experience in so many areas of the business. So the willingness to step out of your own comfort zone into an area where you do not have expertise in order to grow expertise. So it's the stepping into the unknown. She has a wonderful quote, which becomes sort of the second reason I believe she's courageous. It's just a fantastic quote, and it goes back to the courage continuum that I showed you earlier between safety and opportunity. She said, courage and growth, actually she said, comfort and growth. She said, comfort and growth don't coexist. What a great quote that is, and one that to be mindful of. Comfort and growth don't coexist. I'll share with you another example, a little bit very contemporary, progressive, and new example, I'd say, and that is Sheryl Sandberg. And Sheryl Sandberg is the COO of Facebook. She was formerly with Google before that, so she's got rich technology experience. She's a Harvard grad. She is somebody who can be looked up to. And she's really stepping out as a woman who takes women's issues very seriously, and it's part of her goal to get more women into the C-suite. She wants to see more women become C-level executives, which I think is terrific. And she recently divulged, it's been in the past maybe 3 weeks, and many of you have probably noticed this. You probably saw it either as a YouTube video, which there is one, or as an article clip, that she recently divulged that for the last bunch of years, she's been leaving work at 5:30 at night. She's got children. She goes home. She wants to be with them for dinner. She wants to cook dinner. She wants to be with her family. And she knows she works hard. She knows the value that she brings. She is in the C-suite as a COO, but she leaves at 5:30 at night. And she said that it's only been in the recent last 2 years or so where she had enough confidence that she was willing to admit that because of all of the pressures around her from people like other people who stay really late or get there really early in the morning, that she felt very self-conscious to be able to admit it. Now she's got enough self-confidence, self-awareness, self-assuredness She freely admits and role models the ability to have balance in her life by leaving at 5:30, and she does it on purpose. She wants other people to see that this is the kind of behavior that we should not shame, that we should be proud of, because we need to have a life, not just a work life. The next example I want to share with you is a client of mine that I've worked with on 4 occasions. And if we can go to the next slide, I wonder if you know who this is before we show you her name. I'll reveal it now, but whenever I do workshops, I talk about Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, and people always say, oh, that's Spanx lady. Yes, that's the Spanx lady. Sarah and I have worked together on 4 occasions. Sarah wrote the foreword to my book, Courage Goes to Work. And I can tell you that Sarah, despite being demure, she's probably all of 110 pounds, she has a lioness heart, and she has this gigantic, courageous spirit. And last month, on the cover of Forbes magazine, if we can move to the next slide, she's on the cover of Forbes magazine last month as the youngest self-made woman billionaire. Now, Sarah started her business with $5,000 and has turned it into a $1 billion international retail enterprise. Here's a quote that she has, which I think is wonderful, and it's also something that you can do as a practice, and I'll explain this after the quote. In every situation where I was ever afraid but kept on moving, you could substitute the word courageous for afraid. I was afraid, i.e. courageous, when I started Spanx with $5,000 in savings. I was afraid when I knocked on the doors of textile mills, begging them to manufacture my new footless pantyhose. I was afraid when I met with buyers and tried to convince them to sell Spanx products. And I was afraid the first time I went on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Now, the practice that you can do for anyone on today's webinar is write down a few paragraphs, maybe a page worth, of those times when you were really afraid and yet kept on moving. Maybe you took a job that eclipsed your skills. Maybe you confronted the boss and gave them real feedback. Maybe you confronted a peer and gave them tough feedback. Maybe you accepted something about yourself. Maybe you went through a 360-degree feedback. But when are those times where you did something that you had anxiety and fear, you were really uncomfortable, but you kept on moving? Cross out the word fear and anxiety and replace it with the word courageous. Here's the thing to know. Courage is not about fearlessness. Courage is not fearless. That's a really important point. Courage is fearful. When you're in a courageous moment, you are full of fear. Your skin is blotchy, your palms are sweating, your stomach is rioting with teeming butterflies, your mouth is getting dry. Those are all of the responses that you would have with fear, but if you keep moving through that fear, that's what it means to be courageous. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite the fact that you are afraid. These kind of leaders, I call them fillers. So we move to the next slide. A courageous leader, in my mind, has a number of things going for them. First, they're personally courageous. They're willing to role model courage, which is one of the things that one of you mentioned before as an attribute of an admirable leader. They do courageous things themselves, that they are role models of courage. And by role modeling, they inspire other people. They also purposely ask people to do things that are outside of their own comfort zone by providing them with stretch assignments, by giving them new goals that ask more of them. So they constantly move us into a condition of bettering ourselves. They inspire us to stretch. They literally cause us to be encouraged. So if you think of that word encouragement, it's putting courage inside of other people to encourage them. In fact, my title on my business card is Chief Encouragement Officer. And it really needs to be everybody's title if you're in a leadership role. The dividend for that, when you're a courageous leader, is that you get deep, profound loyalty from the people that you lead. Sarah Blakely's a really good example of that. The people in her workforce, I've never heard anybody in her workforce speak badly about her. So I want to share with you a quote from somebody who's not an old softie, because some people will be like, well, this is all about soft skills. Let me tell you something. These are hard skills, not soft skills, because if they were easy, more people would be doing them. Here's the quote. You don't lead people by hitting them over the head. Any damn fool can do that. It's usually called assault, not leadership. I'll tell you what leadership is. It's persuasion and conciliation and education and patience. And this is a 5-star general, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, eventually President of the United States. And he's talking about a different kind of leadership. Let's go ahead and move now to what I call Courage 101. 3 different ways of thinking about courage. And I'll share with you that I think that not all courage is the same. That sometimes we'll talk about courage as if it's just this one big mass, and it dwarfs us in size. And then we start thinking, well, I'm not really, courage is just for heroes. Well, I think that it's more useful to think of courage in 3 different ways and to temper it down into a more everyday experience of courage, not full of bravado, but a courage that is more regulated and more tempered. The first bucket of courage, and I think that there are 3 different behavioral buckets that I call the 3 buckets of courage. The first one is dealing with the courage of action, doing something that you've never done before. Maybe you've been wanting to go on the management track and you sort of volunteer to take on employees, something you've never done before. But trying something you've never done, for you it's a pioneering event. Maybe other people have done it, but for you, you're moving into the unknown because you have not done it before. It's the courage of bold action. It's the courage of innovation. It's the courage of initiative. It's the courage it takes to experiment and do something that you haven't done. Others might have, but you haven't. And it can be exhausting. That's different than the second bucket of courage, which is not about the courage of bold action. Sometimes courage of inaction. It's what I call trust courage. It's the courage of vulnerability. It's the courage of releasing my need to control. It's the courage of my releasing the need to be right all the time. Now, I don't know about you, but I tend to be a controlling person. And if you're a controlling person, the more controlling you are, the more likely you are to be distrustful of others. The more perfectionistic you are, the more distrusting you tend to be of others. So it's hard to get to trust, because if I trust somebody else and they screw up, it may hurt me. It may become a reflection on me. So withholding trust is a very easy thing to do. Giving trust takes courage. Trusting another person before they have proven it means extending yourself. And yet if you don't do it, you get locked in these trust stalemates. So trust is essential. There's a great book. Many of you have heard about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. The number 1 dysfunction of a team is lack of trust. So getting to trust takes courage, but it's a different kind of courage than try courage. It's not the courage of bold action. It's the courage of vulnerability. Let's move to the 3rd bucket of courage, and that is tell courage. Tell courage is the courage of voice or assertiveness, saying the difficult thing, recognizing that it might be hard for that person's ears to hear. Earlier, 46% of you said the most difficult thing for you to do in the workplace, of all those workplace concepts, the one you felt required the most courage was managing conflict. This is the bucket that involves conflict. When you're speaking your truth, regardless of how difficult it is for the other person to accept that truth, knowing that they might get defensive about when you deliver your truth. This is not biting your tongue to go along and getting along. This is about you asserting what you believe to be true as opposed to hiding that truth. Very difficult to do. I find that in the lower levels in the organization, the tell courage bucket is the one most lacking and needs to be most full. At higher levels in the organization, trust courage is the one that tends to be most lacking. And people get a little jaded as time goes on because they've been betrayed, and betrayal often goes with the trust bucket. So these are 3 different ways of thinking about courage. In the Courageous Leadership material and in the workshop that we do around courageous leadership, which you can do as well, we have a courageous leadership profile that allows people to measure these 3 buckets of courage for themselves, to find out which of their bucket, the courage of initiative, which is try courage, the courage of vulnerability, which is trust courage, and the courage of assertiveness, which is tell courage, so that they can see which of their buckets is high and which bucket might need to have more courage. Now, HRDQ is very special to me. And because we had so many people register for today's call, I'm going to give you a bonus bucket. It's what I think is the fourth bucket of courage. And it's people like you that have taught me this, because in workshops, many people would come up to me and say, Bill, you know, what about, it's hard to deliver a message to somebody, but you know, what about the courage it takes to actually hear a message? And I think they're right, and I think you're right. I call this take in courage. And take in courage is the courage it takes to hear critical feedback and take this feedback and take it in. So when somebody criticizes you, or even when they offer you a compliment, and this is something very difficult, in particular, it's very difficult for women. Man, men, when they hear a compliment, it's like, tell me more, tell me more. But a lot of times women, when they hear a compliment, they're like, oh, it wasn't nothing. It wasn't really me. They downplay it. They don't want that. They feel uncomfortable hearing something good about themselves. So it's the courage it takes to take in feedback, be it positive or negative. And it requires lowering your defenses, not being sensitive, to being receptive to the information, accepting your flaws and your gifts, and it may mean disrupting your self-perception. So it's dangerous. Therefore, it comes with a risk. Therefore, it takes courage to hear feedback without getting defensive, what we call take in courage. All right, terrific. So let's go ahead and move now to, I just want to share with you a few tips, and then I'm so looking forward to opening it up to hearing some of your questions. But here's just a couple of tips on how to activate your own courage. The first one is to identify, where are you playing it too safe? So maybe just jot down on a piece of paper, think about, you know, where am I playing it too safe with my career, and maybe I'm the only one who knows it. And then think about, what is the next courageous action that I should take because I'm too safe in that area? Safety, when it's too far on that continuum for too long, can become dangerous for you and dangerous for your career, because it's the danger is apathy and obsolescence. So it's moving away from playing it too safe to learning to play it towards opportunity. The second tip is to find yourself somebody in the organization who you can admire and crawl up under their wing and get some mentoring from them. Maybe they've got something that you don't. Maybe they have an attribute that you don't. Maybe they are have a high tell courage bucket and you find it really difficult to assert yourself. So lean into that person and get their guidance. I would suggest this. Because I think it was 81%, maybe higher, of the workforce in senior level positions are still men. You can't ignore that reality. Some of your mentoring has to come from men, because we exist in a business construct that is male-dominated and was largely shaped and made by men. So you should get mentoring from men as well as women. So when you're looking for a mentor, don't exclude men from the equation. Make sure you have a strong female mentor that you can look up to, and make sure that you have a male mentor as well. And that suggestion, by the way, goes for men or women on today's webinar. And then finally, the third tip I would offer you is to take a symbolic risk. Don't take you heard Sarah tell you in the beginning of my introduction that I used to be a professional high diver. I used to dive from 100-foot platforms into small pools for a living. No high diver in their right mind would go up to the top of a 100-foot ladder and jump off even once without jumping 100 times from 1 feet. Do your lead-ups. Do small things on your way to the bigger thing. And sometimes it helps to take a symbolic risk. I knew a woman who at 50 years old, she had gotten plateaued in her career. And the reality was her real aspiration was to start her own business. Frankly, she wanted to become a professional speaker. Her name is Martha Lanier. You can even go to marthalanier.com and find out all about her. She's a fantastic person. And when she was about 50 years old, in fact, it was her 50th birthday, she really wanted to move out and go into the speaking business, but she didn't have the courage to do it. And then her daughter said, hey, Mom, for your birthday, I want to take you parachuting. And so she went skydiving with her daughter. It was such an elation experience. It's taught her about her own grit It showed her how much courage she was capable of. She thought, man, if I could do that, I can do anything. And sure enough, within a week, she had left her job, started her speaking business, which continues to be successful today. So consider taking a symbolic risk before you take another risk. Now, I want to hear from you in just a moment. But before I do, I want Sarah to share with you a terrific opportunity that you might want to consider about the Courageous Leadership material.
Thanks, Bill. Go ahead and send us in your questions. We will have a few minutes here for Bill to answer some personal questions from you. We have some already in the doc from throughout the presentation, but go ahead and send those in to us, and we'll pick and choose those as we have time to finish those. We have gotten a few questions already about how you can deliver this in your own organization, and that's with, as Bill already mentioned, the Courageous Leadership, the workshop. There's a facilitator guide. You can get that at 40% off using the coupon code CL Webinar, and that's all the way through to the end of the month. The workshop facilitator guide, it gives you all of the instructions you need to train this session internally, gives you the sample participant guide and a workbook, and then a PowerPoint presentation for a classroom session. We have a number of successful clients that Bill works with directly, Saks Fifth Avenue, UBS Bank, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield. So go ahead and take advantage of the offer. There is a 30-day return policy, so you can take a look at that material and start using that in your organization. So we do have some questions coming in, so go ahead and keep those coming. Our first question here, Bill, is from Kim. And Kim asks, are there gender differences with regards to how men and women experience courage?
I think it's a very interesting question and one I've contemplated. I think at the meta level, the answer is no. I think that when we experience a courageous situation, by definition, we're feeling feelings of fear or anxiety or discomfort, and that's male or female. Physiologically, what happens to you when you're facing a courageous situation happens whether you're male or female. Your palms are sweating and your stomach gets nervous and maybe you throw up. I mean, all of those things happen regardless of which sex you are. That said, I do think that there are some differences, and some of them might be based on the male and female experiences. So, for example, men, 17-year-old boys with skateboards will try more dangerous tricks when women are watching. So when girls are watching, they'll try more dangerous tricks, and they get injured more. Now, men tend towards physical daredevilry. Now, certainly there's a lot of female daredevils, but it classically, stereotypically, more men do that than women. Conversely, women are more willing to experience the courage of vulnerability. In my experience, women are more willing to go to places where their, quote, feelings are, and they'll disclose more. Willing to experience the courage that vulnerability requires, and it's very difficult for men to do that. So I think that there are differences in the types of courageous experiences that will seek out whether you're a male or you're female, or where you feel more comfortable with being uncomfortable, I would say. But I think at the meta level, the answer is no. At the more specific level, it's probably yes, at least in terms of how we seek out courage.
Great, thank you. We have the same question coming in from a few people, so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Primarily, Suzanne has asked this question, but it's around some ideas that you could give people on finding a mentor. And some of them actually specifically bring up that their organization does not have a mentorship program, and so how do you start looking maybe outside of your organization?
If you are in a leadership role, or not, but primarily if you're in a leadership position where you're managing others, I would strongly urge and encourage anyone on today's webinar to make sure that you belong to associations in your field of practice. So I'm a member of the American Society for Training and Development, for example, and I get a lot of value from that. And then go to those meetings, those monthly meetings, and start interacting and networking with other professionals in the workforce. So that's one thing. And then it can also be, I'm also on the local board of directors. I'm of Leadership Asheville, North Carolina, where I live. I'm the chairman of the board. But as you interact with boards on nonprofits, a lot of times there are powerful people on those boards. The Habitat for Humanity here in Asheville. I'm on the board of the YMCA. And most of the time you're dealing with senior level executives, male and female. And I have found some very strong, powerful women that I get mentoring from. In fact, I get mentoring on how to be more sensitive to female issues that way. So those are two things I would say. One is belong to an association in your field of practice, however it may be. And secondly, consider joining nonprofit boards or volunteering for a nonprofit if you're not able to be on the board. But most of the time you should be able to find that. And you'll get some very good mentoring from the people that you admire and respect.
Great. And our last question today, we still have some coming in. So if we did not get a chance to answer your question, feel free to continue to send those in. Bill will respond to each of those, and we'll send those out actually to everyone on the line today. But our last question for this afternoon, this one is from Jennifer, Bill. And as you've come to learn more about women's unique issues and challenges in the workplace, what has surprised you the most?
I tell you, like I said, I'm this dunderheaded guy. I'm just a guy who I've got plenty of work experience, but I'm also an ex-athlete, and I've thought in the past like a lot of guys do in sort of stereotypical ways. And I guess what has surprised me the most is how powerful and strong women are. Women are not victims. Let me just make that clear right now in the webinar. There's no women that are victims on this webinar. That I think that the media portrays that and likes to play that up, and then men fall into thinking that way. But I'll just give you two quick examples. And again, take the politics out of it. Just look for it at face value. Recently, when Rush Limbaugh made his comments about Sarah Fluke, women mobilized on Facebook and through social media and made that man, that pompous man, apologize. And because women won't stand for it. Women are very powerful. If there is a war on women, there is a powerful insurgency called women. Another example of it was when the Susan G. Komen Foundation decided that they were going to pull funding from Planned Parenthood. Again, take the politics out of it. What I'm interested in is how quickly women mobilized and marshaled and said, So if there is this media likes to sensationalize and dismiss and itch our annoyances, and play up this idea that women are victims. And my real surprising relief is that it's quite the opposite. Not only are women powerful, I think that they bring so much assets to organizations and their power as it's coming into play now more and more that that women matter. That women are really, really important, really, really powerful, and we cannot dismiss women, and we should not. And it's to men's peril to do that. I wish more and more men could have the experience that I had in getting closer to women's issues, so not to be sensitive, but so that we could work in harmony, in collaboration with women and make our organizations better together and not be at some sort of false war that's being portrayed by the media. I want to just say one last thing before we wrap it up, and that is that you can do this, have these conversations around women in the workplace, use these PowerPoint slides, that you can bring this stuff to your own organizations with this facilitator material. You don't have to hire a highfalutin consultant. Do it yourself. Just start talking about courage with the people that you work with. The Facilitators Guide is a marvelous way to do that. There's scripts in there, and et cetera. And I'm just so thankful, HRDQ. What a fantastic deal that you're offering people as a result of this webinar. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Bill. It's been wonderful having you share your expertise with us today. And thank you, everyone on the line. Go ahead and continue to send in your questions. We'll stay on the line a little bit longer here so that those questions can keep rolling in. And Bill will send a response out to everyone in another few days here as he gets to answer all of those. But we really appreciate your time today, and we hope you found the webinar informative.